Hi guys, it's time to take care of this particular chapter. And as you can see here, this chapter is called vSAN cluster maintenance. Now, in this page, they're trying to tell you why this topic is very important. And the goal here is quite simple. When you're doing some kind of maintenance, you want to make sure that your decisions do not impact the virtual machines that you have in your environment. So as you can see here, notice it says the maintenance of computing, network, and storage resources on production systems must be achieved without causing downtime. So if you take a look, this chapter has 3 lessons. The first one deals with what happens when you put a host in maintenance mode. The second one deals with growing the cluster and replacing faulty hardware. The third one talks about upgrading and updating virtual SAN. So if we start with lesson number 1, here you can see the first lesson is called vSAN cluster maintenance operations. And what I want to do here is I want to do one demo. And in this demo, what I want to do is I want to show you a brand new feature of 7.0 Update 1. So in this lesson, we are going to be talking about the different choices that you have when you put a host in maintenance mode. If you've been working with vSAN for a while, you probably know that there are 3 choices: ensure accessibility, full data migration, and no data migration. We'll talk about all 3 and what is the difference of all 3. Notice, we'll talk about the right way of shutting down a host in your cluster. Also, we'll talk about how to migrate your cluster so it uses the brand new vCenter. And then finally, we'll talk about vSAN logs and vSAN traces. So in this page, here what they try to tell you is that when you right-click on a host, if you decide to put the host in maintenance mode, on the vSphere client, a pop-up window appears and it shows you 3 choices. The default choice is ensure accessibility. And I'm going to show you in a few pages that you can change if you want the default. Besides that one, you have full data migration and no data migration. Now, if you take a look, here what they try to tell you is that nowadays when you put a host in maintenance mode, to truly understand the ramifications of your decision, if you click on pre-check, it's going to tell you exactly how many VMs will be impacted by your decision. So if we go to the next page, let's talk about what this means. Now, in this case, we're trying to explain to you the default. And the default is ensure accessibility. So what ensure accessibility is doing is simply moving the bare minimum to ensure that every virtual machine can continue to run. Now, if you take a look, I'm about to put host 1, aka ESXi1, in maintenance mode. And as you can see here, that host has 1 component for VM1. And you can see VM1 is not redundant. So when you choose to ensure accessibility, we need to move that component elsewhere to make sure that that virtual machine can continue to run. But when it comes to VM2, if you look at the illustration on the left side, you can see that the VM is a 2-way mirror. So that VM can live without that submirror. So in this case, we're only moving 1 component out of host 1, and we're choosing not to move the second submirror, let's say for the second VM, because again, the VM can live without it. Now, when I go to this page, here you can see that every choice you make has, again, a type of repercussion that you need to truly understand well. So when you look at this page, here you can see how many objects will become non-compliant. Because again, remember, we're talking about having absent components. And again, these absent components are going to be the ones, for example, in the different objects, such as the VM home namespace object, your disk object, your swap object, potentially your snapshot object, and so on. Now, when I go to this page, here again, they're trying to explain to you a brand new feature in 7.0 Update 1. And this is the existence of a brand new type of component, which is called a Delta component. Now, in order to understand what a delta component is, we need to understand what used to happen in the past versus what happens now. So let's compare, let's say, 6.7 to 7.0 update 1. Let's say in this case, I have a VM, and let's say that in 6.7, I decide to put ESXi01 in maintenance mode. If I went with ensure accessibility, what I was doing is I was taking a chance. Think about it. One submirror is absent. Now that VM is running. So this submirror is going through changes. Now imagine, while this was down, that this host crashes. Now, of course, this copy is unavailable. Now your instinct probably is going to be to take this host out of maintenance mode and try to start the VM with this copy. The problem is this copy is stale. It doesn't have the latest and greatest. So in that scenario, you wouldn't be able to start the VM. We don't let you start the VM with an old copy. Now, let's talk about 7.0 update 1. We have, in this case, 4 servers. You can see the VM is a two-way mirror. So we have 2 submirrors. You put this host in maintenance mode. So this is obviously absent. What the system does now, in another host, it creates a delta component. So as you're going through changes, this copy is being updated, but the changes also go in the delta. Now, if this host fails, and you take this host out of maintenance mode, this one, the one that was stale, uses the delta component to update its records to allow you to start the virtual machine. So it's pretty cool. And in the GUI, you will get to see the presence of a delta component. You will see, just like you see here, the presence of a component called RAID_D, D for delta. Now that gets created automatically. And when you take the server out of maintenance mode, you can imagine again, at that point, we don't need that component anymore. So it gets deleted automatically. And if you take a look, remember, when you put a host in maintenance mode, if you choose ensure accessibility, we're talking about what? Absent components. So remember, you have a default value of 60 minutes. If you do not bring that host out of maintenance mode in 60 minutes, what's going to happen is we're going to try to rebuild that data somewhere else using the other copy. So if it takes you usually 90 minutes to patch up a host, you want to change that timer from 60 minutes to 90 minutes. And that used to be changed at the host level before. Now it's at the cluster level. In the old days, there was a parameter called vSAN clone repair delay. That parameter no longer exists at the host level. You don't find it anymore. Again, you change it at the cluster level. Now, when you take a look, that's what they try to tell you on this page. So if you think about it, 60 minutes is the default. Some people change it. Once again, depending how long it takes you to patch up a host, you may need to change that and potentially increase that value. Now here we're talking about full data migration. Now with full data migration, what you're saying is, I don't want to take a chance. You're saying, no, I want to move all the data so at all times I have multiple copies of that particular set of data. So again, if you lose a host while one is in maintenance mode, it doesn't matter. You still have 2 valid copies. So again, you're playing it safe. Now, if you think about it, however, you're talking about moving additional data before the host goes into maintenance mode, which again, if you think about it, means it's going to take longer to put a host in maintenance mode. And that's what they try to show you in this illustration. Once again, we're putting host 1 in maintenance mode. In this case, unlike the first one, we're moving not only the component for VM1 for obvious reasons, but we're also moving the component for VM2 that was in host 1. And in this case, it can only move to host 2. When you take a look, for obvious reasons, you need to architect your cluster properly. So again, that's why here, you can see it says cluster size considerations. Remember, you may have read or you may have heard about the concept of slack space. So for you to make sure that you can move that data, that's why typically we tell you to reserve 25 to 30% of the available space. Again, you got to think sometimes worst case scenario. Now, as I mentioned before, whether you choose ensure accessibility or full data migration, you can very easily see what's going to happen when you do that. So once again, we're talking about pre-check. And if you take a look, no data migration is quite simple. I would use this option if I want to shut down the entire cluster. So for example, I live in Florida. We have hurricanes here. We see them coming. So let's say for argument's sake, we know a hurricane is coming on Sunday. Come Friday, I shut down all the VMs, and then I shut down all the hosts, and I choose no data migration. When at the last minute, the hurricane goes somewhere else, obviously at that point, I start to power on all my hosts, and then finally, I turn on all of my virtual machines. And if you take a look, right, once again, here you can see that they're showing you the pre-check if you were to choose no data migration. You can imagine, again, you're going to have all sorts of issues when it comes to the health of the objects. Now, I've mentioned you could modify the default when it comes to what is chosen when you go and put a host in maintenance mode. So you can see here's the name of the parameter. It is an advanced parameter at the host level. Notice, here you can see the name of the parameter. You can see the default value. And on the left side, you get to see the keywords, which again are going to be used to choose either no data migration, that would be no action. And as you can see, you have another one called evacuate all data. That would be the keyword for full data migration. Now, when you move things around, or for that matter, as things change and objects grow, be aware that you may get a warning that it's time to do something called a proactive rebalance. And a proactive rebalance will take place. Again, the warning will take place if the maximum load variance is higher than 30%. Now, what do I mean? If one disk is at 50%, and let's say one disk is at 2%, the difference between 50 and 2 is more than 30%. At that point, the system will tell you that it would be a good idea to do a proactive rebalance. But you don't want to do that in the middle of the day because you're talking about moving a lot of data around. And when you take a look, nowadays, if you want, you can enable automatic rebalance. So when you enable automatic rebalance, you don't have to anymore click on proactive rebalance. The system will move things automatically. And as you can see here, it says rebalancing can wait up to 30 minutes to start, giving time to high priority tasks, such as entering maintenance mode when it comes to a host, or obviously fixing a particular object before moving data around. And you can see here, we show you how to enable automatic rebalance. And we also show you the fact that you don't have to necessarily go with 30%. You can change that value. So, we talked about the concept of slack space. M07 Update 1 is the ability to reserve capacity automatically. And you have two choices. You can reserve operations reserve, or again, I should say we could enable operations reserve, and we could also enable host rebuild reserve. Now, in the statements on the left side, they explain to you what these are. So notice, instead of having to manually always take into consideration slack space, in 7.0 Update 1, you can again reserve a chunk of the space for either operations or host rebuild operations. What is the difference? Notice, operations reserve, it says right here, it reserves capacity for internal vSAN operations, such as object rebuilds or repairs. Host rebuild reserve is a little bit different. Notice this reserves capacity to ensure that all objects can be rebuilt if a host failure takes place. So when you take a look, here we show you how to do it. So you can actually see that if you go to the monitor tab, and if you want, of course, there you choose capacity, then you see these new choices. When you say, I want to enable it, this again will take you to the configuration tab. All right, so we've been going for a while. Remember, I said I was going to do a demo. So let's take a little break. And when we come back, I'll finish the lesson and then I'll do the demo. I'll see you in a few, guys. Thank you.